Thank you, everyone. It's funny, how many of you have noticed that there's no clear way to get into this church? There's no clear indication of where the entrance is. I completely circumnavigated the church. It made me think, many are called, but few can get in the church. I was amazed how many cars there are here. I wonder, I could barely find a place to park. I wonder if SouthWest Riders gets more people than the worship services do. I don't know. These days, I don't know. I might not be surprised. It's being a writer, I think of things symbolically. And while I was circumnavigating the church and tromping through the chamisa and trying to figure out how to get in and trying all the doors, it occurred to me that that's just like the writing life is. You know, we write and we write and we write, but somehow there's no clear path to kind of get into publication or to get your work in front of others. And of course, not everybody has to get their work published, but a lot of us want an audience. You know, it's funny because for the National Endowment, 1,700 people applied, and you have to have 3 books in print to even apply, or some equivalent. And I looked at the list of the other people who won the award, because they give, it's either 34 or 36 fellowships each year. Probably this is the last year, because our government is about to cut all funding for anything extra, which includes the arts, if they have their way, if the budget goes through. So if you want an arts program in this country, I don't want to get political, but don't vote for those people. Seriously, if you want good education, don't vote for those people. If you don't want the top 1% to get tax cuts while we continue to struggle, do not vote for those people. It's obvious. Okay, that's as political as I'm going to get. But anyway, I thought I'd better apply this year because it's likely to be the last year, you know, and I have applied before. But what struck me is that means there's 1,700 other mid-list authors who most of us have never heard of, with 3 books out there. It's kind of remarkable how many of us there are. And of course, I don't know about you all, but when my books were first going into print, in fact, I've seen people make this mistake. They get 1 book into print and they think, that's it, I'm just coasting for the rest of my life. It's, you know, I've got it made. And of course, that's not exactly the way it is. In fact, if your first book is published and doesn't do well, you'll have a harder time getting a second book into print than you did having the first book get into print. I bet some of you have been through that. So my subject for today is dimension in fiction, creative nonfiction, memoir, etc. And I want to talk about that, but because of these recent events I've gone through, I feel compelled to talk a little bit about the broader subject of applying creativity to your whole writing life, and or to your entire life, in fact. Could somebody bring me up a glass of water or a little bottle of water? Somebody who's the boss? Okay, thank you. I see somebody back there. Oh, somebody's got me one. Thank you very much, man. Yeah. So, my wife Tanya and I teach a workshop every year. I think we're in our 11th or 12th year, called Right to the Finish, and it's a workshop that happens online and by telephone conferencing, by today's standards. Well, let's just say easy technology. It's not real complex technology, and we've had people participate from all over the world. We've had people from New Zealand, Italy, Australia, England, Germany, Bhutan, Vietnam. That's only half of the, Singapore. We've got someone from Singapore this year, mostly expats.
Many Americans?
Many Americans. And it's a 9-month kind of matrix and support for helping people finish a book-length work. And One of the things that I always tell, so Tanya and I have helped literally hundreds of people get their books finished. Of course, getting it into print is a whole other thing. But that's what I want to begin by speaking about. Incidentally, I have a blank piece of paper up here on the table, and I always forget to ask people to sign up if they want to be kept informed of what our writing workshops are. Or you can just look on you can find my website, which is just murphyzen.com. Murphy plus Zen, not the plus mark, murphyzen.com. I'm also a meditation teacher, Zen meditation teacher. So that's where that comes from, and it's part of my subject. My nonfiction book is about Zen in America, and I do a lot with incorporating the meditative state of mind with the creative process. And one of the things I've learned from doing that is that most writers, for most of us, we have, see, meditation, everybody thinks it's about chilling out. They think that Zen's about chilling out, and that's just a side effect. What it's really about is gaining freedom of mind and heart, which means getting beyond our fixed ideas. Writers very, very commonly think that the cool part of writing is writing the book, and the rest of it is kind of BS, and we don't want to deal with it, right? And so I always encourage our writers to, I also teach at University of New Mexico and a bunch of other settings. I'm always encouraging people to think creatively about not only the creativity doesn't stop with finishing a book, because I know lots of writers who have 4 or 5 good books sitting on their shelves completed, and when it's finished they don't know what to do, so they go on to the next one. And I'm convinced that some of the finest books out there never get published. And the reason is that the kind of mind that wants to write a book is rarely the kind of mind that wants to get out there and sell and promote a book. They're two really different, divergent types of skill sets. And we tend to think that one is completely different from the other. That's when I talk about mental structures that get in our way that we don't realize are there. That's one of the things I'm talking about. So when I finished my first novel, which was called The Hope Valley Hubcap King, it took me 12 years to finish, by the way, and because I had no idea what I was doing, and that's the way it is for a lot of us writing a first book, right? But when I finally finished it, I had a manuscript, I had an MFA from the Naropa Institute, but an MFA doesn't do a thing for you in terms of getting your book published. You know, it helps you learn to write, which is wonderful. But as far as getting the book into print, that's a whole other thing. So, you know, partly because of my Zen practice, I realized that one of the things we do in meditation practice is we look for those unconscious mental barriers. And I had the same unconscious mental barrier that a lot of us have, which is the writing's the cool part and everything else is just a bunch of BS, right? But I thought, well, maybe I could extend or stretch that point of view and think of the whole thing as the creative process. And that was 20 years ago that I finished that book. And that attitude has worked for me, and it's also worked for a lot of other writers. I'm proud to say that when we put out our most recent newsletter, Tanya and myself, we call our organization Big Sky Writers, and we put out our most recent newsletter, we had, I think, 10 or more students placed in awards, in the semifinals or finals or honorable mention or somewhere in the award series, some of them in the same award series, the Faulkner Award that I won the award in. So how come this happened? Is it because we're great teachers? Well, yes, of course. But it's also because they entered. Why have I won all sorts of awards? I enter everything. You know, that's one of these ideas that, you know, when I first finished The Hope Valley Hubcap King after 12 years, when I started to realize that this attitude might help me of viewing the whole thing as the creative process, I thought, okay, let's think about this creatively. What can I do to get my book in front of the eyes of people who might be interested? Well, I could send out hundreds of query letters to agents saying, you've never heard of me, but I finished a novel. And I have an agent, a New York agent, Peter Ruby now, and last time I visited him in his New York office, in the corner of his office, I kid you not, there was a pile of manila envelopes with unsolicited manuscripts in one corner that stretched to the ceiling, was spilling out over his floor. I mean, there must have been hundreds of them. And he's, you know, everybody in the publishing industry, for the most part, I mean, there are more glamorous and more profitable professions, right? Most people are in the book industry because they love books, you know? So Peter's no exception. He thinks he'll get to those manuscripts one day, but doesn't happen, right? So I thought, well, what's going to make my manuscript or my query letter, you know, you're all pretty informed, you know, usually you start with a query letter. What's going to make my query letter stand out from the others? I thought, I knew from just a little smattering of things I'd sent out when I was an undergraduate, when I used to write plays, and from time to time, since then, into when I was taking my master's degree, I had figured out that it wasn't a bad idea to enter awards, because just knowing something about the way the human mind operates and knowing that the people who enter everything and the people who write good books are very often two completely different populations, right? I intuited that, well, I discovered from experience that when I entered something, I very often ended up in the semifinals or finals. And I started to ask myself, why? What did that mean, you know? And, you know, I hadn't won anything major, but I would place. And I thought, well, I wonder if that means that publishable submissions, or in the case of plays, which I was submitting first, the producible submissions, maybe they're not the majority of what comes into those awards. Maybe the majority of what comes in isn't even really in the running, and that's a sad thing. But I've been involved in one of those contests once. I can't remember who it was for. Tanya and I were judges. It might have even been for one of the SouthWest Writers Conference. And I discovered that I was absolutely right, that you could kind of weed out half of the submissions right away because they just weren't even in the running. So anyway, when I finished my manuscript, I thought, okay, if I take a year and submit to some awards and I even place in the finals or semifinals, then at least I have something to say in my query letter that might make me stand out from the pack. So I determined, and this was in 1998, so, or it's in I might have started in 1997 sending it around. And in those days, of course, you couldn't do couple of punches on the computer and get your manuscript submitted. You had to print the thing out, in which case I started working for the university, so I would sneak in and pirate use of their Xerox machine, because I think that was the first semester. Does anyone work for UNM? Do not tell them. You know, that was my first year living in Taos, and I was really broke. I was, when I came to Taos, I was 39 years old. I had an MFA, half a manuscript, and no prospects. You know, and as soon as I got to Taos, I lived on credit cards for a year, and I finished the, how did I get credit cards? Why did they give me credit cards? I don't know. Anyway, very foolish of them, but anyway, and I finished that manuscript. And then I was broke, and I was just starting to teach at the university, which doesn't exactly fill your coffers quickly. And so I would sneak in and Xerox manuscripts, and then you know how you used to have to do it. You'd have to have the self-addressed envelope and two self-addressed envelopes, one for the manuscript, one for the announcement, and all this stuff. And then you had to put this package together, and then you had to go to the post office, and it cost $58 to send it because it weighed so much. And also the awards, of course, have entry fees. But, you know, I figured, okay, at least these people are going to probably read my manuscript because I'm paying them to do it, right? This is all what I call thinking creatively. It might not seem like exciting creative thinking, not as exciting as writing your book, but it is creative thinking. It's thinking, you know, what's the world like? What might help? How can I get somebody to look at this? So my goal, and I always recommend this to everyone, don't plan on winning an award, because that's always a complete crapshoot. You know, it depends on who else is in the running, it depends on the preconceptions of the judge, etc. But I thought all I needed to do was place in a few awards, you know, semifinals or finals, and at least there's something in my query letter that makes it stand out, right? That makes sense. So I just thought I'll take a year. And of course, in those days, you couldn't go on the internet and find the awards. I had to go to the library and look in Writers Market and Poets and Writers Magazine and figure it out. So it's very laborious. And my creative mind, like many of ours creative minds, did not want to do this. It didn't want to do this work. Why would it? You know, it wanted to go write the next book and do exciting things, but I made myself do it. And finally, I started to get some responses, and I got plenty of rejections, and most people won't follow my advice. How come? Because they enter two things: they get a rejection or they don't get a response, and they go, there it is, forget it, you know, it's, my writing's not good enough. Well, you don't know, you know, you have to enter everything. Try entering everything for a year. Last year there was something like, some years there aren't a lot of awards for novels, but this year there happened to be a lot. And there were something like 18 awards for full-length fiction, novels or short stories or more, and I entered all of them. And in fact, it was just getting to be November. I spent a year, again, entering everything to kind of give my fiction career a bit of a shot in the arm. And because when you have 4 books out and your publisher hasn't made $1 million off of you yet, you know, their enthusiasm starts to wane a little bit, you know, so I thought I could use a shot in the arm. So I entered everything, and it was coming around the beginning of November, and I'd gotten, I don't know, 16 rejections. I thought, oh, well, you know, I don't know why I bothered telling people. You know, I hadn't even placed in the semifinals or finals of anything. I thought, oh, I'm giving bad advice to people. Then on the same day, I talked to the people at the NEA who'd left me a National Endowment of the Arts, who'd left me a message. I called them back. It turns out I got a National Endowment of the Arts fellowship, and then I went, and, you know, after a couple of hours of just wandering around in a daze trying to process the information, because the NEA, as you all know, is it's a big deal. I was, and it's a real long shot. There were 1,700 people, all of whom have 3 books or the equivalent in print, who also applied, and 34, 36 of us got the award. And then I went and checked my email, and there was the announcement about the Faulkner Award, which I'd also won. And the funny thing is and then it was both for the same 25 pages of an unfinished novel, is what I submitted to both of them. And then a couple of years back, it also, that same 25 pages won the Dana Award in the novel. And I said to my wife, you know, I'm not going to finish this thing. I'm making more money on these 25 pages than I make on any of my complete books. This is... Anyway, you know, anyway, that was good fortune, obviously. But we had 10 of our students, or more, maybe it was, somewhere in that neighborhood, place in awards this year, because I just kept haranguing them to take this attitude of broadening their idea of what creativity is. And so it's something I recommend to everyone. And you've probably noticed, I see a lot of people in my age group or thereabouts in this room. I'm 60 years old. And we probably have all noticed that waiting for somebody to come knock on your door and discover you hasn't happened yet. So the main thing is it's entering the awards it's going to give you information. For the Hemingway Award, I got 3. I think I got a 3rd place, and I got a finalist somewhere, and I got a couple of semifinals, which is just what I wanted. And then I ended up winning the Hemingway Award for a first novel, for my first book, the Hope Valley Hubcap King. That's always a fluke if you win. I already had enough to attract the interest of an agent, because you just say in your query letter, I placed in this, this, and this. Now that I know agents and publishers, I know that they're always complaining that most of what they get isn't publishable the same way as the awards. So, and they know how the awards work. So if you got in the semifinals or finals, they know that there's a good chance that your book's at least somewhere in the realm, you know? I hope I'm making sense with all this. But even after I won the Hemingway Award, I got a couple of really kind of nasty rejections. And, you know, my character is kind of a thoughtful, maybe a little bit spacey, everyman kind of figure named B.B. Brown. And at the beginning of the book, he's a child, and somebody wrote back, who'd want to read this book about this disturbed, possibly autistic child, you know, wandering around America in search of who knows what, you know? And I thought I could laugh at it because I'd won the Hemingway Award, but you know, that would have been painful to receive before. So, but you know, this is all good training, because when your book goes in print, doesn't matter how many people love your book, there's going to be somebody who's going to hate it. And they're going to take pains to write, at least on Amazon, why they hate it or why it's awful, you know? So, what I'm talking about is, what's the creative mind is having a very broad mind. It's having a very big mind that includes the whole 9 yards, not just finishing your book. Because if it's limited to just finishing your book, who knows how to get into the church of publishing? You're going to circle around through the landscaping like I did, jumping over cacti and agaves forever, you know. And so we have to find our way into the church, into the big house of publishing, right? If you want to do that. So let me broaden the conversation here a little bit. What I really came to talk about today, and what I'm doing the workshop on afterward, is dimension in fiction, memoir, and creative nonfiction. And in a certain way, it's a version of the same thing. It's thinking big. And we'll get a chance to do some exercises around this in our actual workshop. But the way this particular work that I do with dimension started is my wife Tanya and I got an invitation to teach at the Muri Center in the Grand Tetons in Wyoming. And we looked at the map, we thought we'd get there in a day, we thought New Mexico, you know, you just go through Colorado and you're in Wyoming. Well, anyway, the Grand Tetons are a good ways up in Wyoming. And it took us much longer than we ever thought. I think it took us 2 days, we had to stay over somewhere. And so we started talking about student work that we'd been receiving, and there was something that bothered me. It bothered me in the writing workshops I took as an undergraduate at University of California, Santa Barbara, and it bothered me about the MFA workshops I took at the Rope Institute. It was that one of the most common feedbacks we'd get in these workshops, or that we give to others, was, well, this piece is flat. How many people know what I'm talking about? That a piece feels flat, or that somebody tells you it's flat. This really bugged me, because whether I was saying that a certain piece was flat, or whether other people were telling me that a certain piece was flat, I could feel what they meant, but nobody seemed to know what to do about it. How many people have experienced that? Well, it's flat. Really? Everyone else has it solved? All right, well, you can all go home. Now, let's just go eat then. No. So this problem of flatness is really common in writing. And one of the ways that we all see it, I think, is it's really common that we've got a story that we tell again and again and again, and our friends and family say, oh my God, you got to write that down, that's so funny, right? Okay, and you go and write it down, and it comes out feeling flat. Often, maybe most of the time, right? And we can't figure out why. I don't know about you all, but that's happened to me. That happened to me a lot back in the day. And I would have, when I first started writing, I would have a drawer full of unfinished pieces. I think, this was such a funny story. Everybody loves it when I write it down. How come it feels so dead, you know? So Tanya and I started talking about this as we were driving through, really to get to Wyoming, you're driving through mountains and plains and valleys and all sorts of stuff. And we started to realize that what made the landscape interesting is what? Dimension. Why does everybody come to New Mexico from Texas? Because Texas is flat. and I'm exaggerating, of course. We all love to make fun of Texas a little bit. But New Mexico has dimension. We got mountains, valleys, forests, rivers, all sorts of stuff, deserts. There's some parts of New Mexico that are flat, but all the people who live there come to northern New Mexico because we got more going on, right? We have the Sandias and the Sangre de Cristos. So we started thinking, well, what can give writing dimension? And we started talking about it, and we started looking at it in writers that we loved. And what we discovered was the way into this, for starters, is really pretty simple. Usually people aren't just writing about one thing. That's what makes it flat. So, for instance, we've got our eccentric Aunt Mabel. And we've always wanted to write about our eccentric Aunt Mabel and the time she showed up at the cabin on the lake, where all the family was, in the red Cadillac convertible. And although she was 83, she had a 19-year-old boyfriend. and they each were carrying a bottle of bourbon. And they were playing really loud rap music on the on the radio. And they rolled up and they danced into the house and caused this giant uproar. And what made it even worse is Mabel's ex-husband and their 5 children were there, right? So you write that down. You think, oh, what a great story! I got to write about this stuff. You write it down, it feels like nothing. It feels really flat, right? So what goes away between me telling it or you telling it and it getting on the page? Anyone want to speak to that? What goes away?
Vocal inflection.
Vocal inflection, voice. What else?
Body language.
Body language, gestures. Okay, that's just the beginning of it, right? All that stuff goes away. So some of that we can maybe duplicate with punctuation and with the way we lay it out on the page. A lot of it can be duplicated. Something else has to happen, you know? So, and it's, somehow we often don't consider what that is, what the difference is. We're baffled by it, and we just kind of stop there. I mean, we might even recognize that that's what goes away, but we don't know how to replace something else. So the simplest way, for those of you who don't take the workshop, you poor souls who are going to miss out on the true secret, the simple way into it is, I hope you all keep a writing notebook and have a list of things you notice and of ideas and phrases and characters and stuff that you notice. And if you don't, I really recommend that you carry a notebook with you always and start to capture everything that stands out to you. If you meet a person who's got a striking or unusual way of speaking or striking unusual gesture or anything about them that makes them an interesting character, if you can make note of that, it's like a mulch pile that will really serve you. But also in the writing notebook goes things I want to write. So for instance, Aunt Mabel showing up at the cabin on the lake with her 19-year-old boyfriend. That goes on there, right? Not my relationship with Aunt Mabel. That's not specific. Not Aunt Mabel, what a character, that's not specific. Some specific, the day she shows up at the lake with her 19-year-old boyfriend in the red Cadillac convertible playing rap music with bourbon in her hands. I don't know, you don't have to write all that down, but you see what I'm speaking of. Rather than, a lot of our lists will have things like on them like love in the 21st century. No, much better to say my weekend with Enrique at the Motel 6. Okay, that's specific. Okay, love in the 21st century will come out through the specifics, right? So I would, the way to just practice this on your own is, I hope you have, if you're working on a book or some sort of project, then you probably know which scenes you have to write, right? Even if you're writing about Aunt Mabel. there's the time she shows up, and then there's the blow up on, you know, a week later when the 5 kids who are older than the 19-year-old boyfriend and their grandkids all pile in to have a fist fight with the 19-year-old boyfriend. Okay, whatever it is. You know, and you'll have 5 specific incidents, you know, and then you'll have all sorts of other things on there. You know, the time the canoe overturned on the lake. You know, the time that that Frankie almost drowned because he got pulled in by a giant trout when he was only 4 years old and fishing by himself, and whatever. The time the alligator almost ate him. I don't know. You know, all these things that happen, as well as things that happen in our life today, right? And what you do is circle the 2 things that seem most unlike. And if you know how to do free writing, if you don't know how to do free writing, I would encourage you to get Natalie Goldberg's book, Writing Down the Bones, and learn about free writing. You know, it's basically a timed writing practice where you start with the topic, and for 10 minutes you just go. You jump over the hesitation, you jump over the doubts, you jump over the lumpy first sentences, and you learn how to get a flow going. And then later you go back and you fix the lumpy first sentences or first paragraph. But you got to get the flow going, and we all know what it's like to be stuck on the first page, right? So, so you circle 2 things that seem most unlike, and you start with one, and in 10-minute writing practice, you try and get to the other. And you'll be surprised what the mind will do. Now, if I was working with 10-year-old kids, they would love this exercise. When I'm working with adults, they all go, ah, okay. And when I actually ask people to do it, they all go, oh, I'm not going to be able to do this. And then 9 times out of 10, they'll read it back afterwards, and they found a way to connect the fact that you just had to have an operation on your shoulder now with your memories of Aunt Mabel at the lake 40 years ago. Why? Because it's all part of your life, and our lives are multidimensional, right? We often, when we think what we want to write about, we've only got one dimension. We want to write about our childhoods. We want to write about our exciting love affair. We want to write about this particular challenge that we had and faced, whatever it is. But we may have an exciting love affair and at the same time lose our job. Or we may get an exciting promotion and have an exciting love affair, but we have a crisis with our health, et cetera, right? We may have all of that, but we have a giant fight with our sister, you know? So life's got all these dimensions, and for a story, any narrative story, to work on the page, we have to find a way of duplicating those dimensions. So what we're doing is we're substituting for the fact that I'm waving my arms around, that my voice is changing inflection and pitch, and there's dramatic pauses and this and that. We're finding ways to provide a dimension that is lost when we put those things on paper. Does that make sense? So let me give a couple of examples. Detective stories, whether they're on television, a movie, or in a book, use this technique all the time. So most of the plots in your average detective story have been used before, right? There's only a certain amount, a certain number of, it's rare that somebody comes up with a completely new plot, right? There are often variations on something that we've seen before, right? So what is it, what else comes into your average detective story that makes it interesting? Yeah, the character, but what is going on with the character?
Crisis.
Yeah, oftentimes a personal crisis, right?
Suspense.
What's that?
Suspense.
Yeah, well, we always want to create suspense, but what I'm specifically pointing to, think of Tony Hillerman. Okay, you probably could boil down most of his plots to something that we've seen in detective stories before. There's a funny story about Tony Hillerman that his daughter, Ann Hillerman, told me once, which is he wrote some detective novels, and they went into publication, and nobody much read them, and his agent was kind of starting to lose patience. And so he had the brilliant idea, since he was doing journalism in Navajo country, he had the brilliant idea to set one of his plots in what he knew, which was Navajo country. And when he submitted it to the publisher said, "Tony, this is the best novel I've ever gotten from you, but you got to get rid of all that Indian crap. So I think he went and got a new agent, which was wise. And of course, the Indian crap is what made it, right? What the agent called the Indian crap is what made it. So it gave it dimension, right? I mean, everything about the Navajos is so interesting, and also, somebody pointed to character, but what is it about the character? You've got, in a lot of those books at least, you've got the older Navajo man who's really acculturated and has worked in law enforcement for a long time and doesn't believe in the old customs and has gotten really acculturated to mainstream culture. And then you've got the younger guy, I can't remember their names. Chi, and what's the other one? Leaphorn and Chi, right? And Leaphorn's the older one?
Yes.
Yeah, and Chi's the younger one? Yeah. And so Chi, on the other hand, is way into the old ways, even though he's younger. He's kind of rediscovering, and he's becoming a medicine man. So there's things that adds to it, like he can't touch a dead body, right? There's things like that. And so you got this tension between the two of them, right? What would the story be without that, without all that? So there's several areas of dimension. There's not just putting the Navajo culture in. The plot's kind of window dressing, what comes from the interest. And then isn't Chi's wife, she's either just died or she has cancer, or in the middle of the series she does. Leaphorn's wife, right. So that's another level, right? Okay. How many people have seen the movie? I haven't seen the series. Apparently there's a series, but how many people have seen the movie Fargo? Oh wow, almost everyone. That's great. Okay, so that's the plot of that movie. I think it actually did come from Hitchcock. It's the basic plot is the guy marries a woman from a rich family. The parents won't give them money, and they need money, so he stages a kidnapping of his wife to get ransom out of the rich parents, right? That's an old plot. We've seen it before. What makes... I bet you can think of 5 things right off the top of your head that give the story added interest. Location, okay. Yeah, so you're in Fargo, and you've got all these scenes of just the white... It's interesting to talk about movies because they're compressed. It's just 90 minutes or maybe 2 hours, whereas a novel's takes you 10 or 12 hours to read, but the principle's the same. So, yeah, you got the setting. What else? There's exaggeration, okay.
The speech.
The local speech. Okay, you've got the local speech, which comes from Scandinavian immigrants, right? So they talk funny to mainstream us. Okay, maybe that's politically incorrect to say they talk funny, but it's part of what makes it charming, right? Is they have this funny speech pattern that most of us haven't heard. Okay, what else?
Well, the tough police lady.
Yeah.
Okay, it's a police lady, for one thing.
She's pregnant.
And she's pregnant. And because she's pregnant, that leads to action, right? What action does it lead to? Does it lead to what? Heaving. She's either heaving, vomiting, right? Or she's eating. Okay? So do you see how that leads to action? She's always got to either get food or she's getting rid of food. Okay? What else?
The misadventures.
What's that? Okay, so what's our reaction to why is the wood chipper in there? What is it? Everybody laughs. Why are you laughing? A person was put in a wood chipper. Why are you laughing? Yeah, ma'am over there?
His head is sticking out of the wood chipper.
Yeah. But what's funny about that? Why is it funny? The badge. Yeah, the whole movie's funny. It's dark humor, right? It's something Hitchcock used a touch of it sometimes, but the whole tone of the movie is very ironic and contemporary. You know that you're in a movie, you're seeing this, and part of the charm of it is nobody really died in the wood chipper, right? In a Hitchcock film, you'd be, oh my God, the person's died in a wood chipper, would have a whole different tone. So that tone of dark humor, which is something that I love and use a lot, is part of what makes it work, right? There's other things we can come up with, but you see what I'm pointing to? Yeah, it's So you got this unusual character. It's unusual anyway to have the, it's becoming less unusual, thankfully, but to have the detective, at the time the movie came out, it was still somewhat of a departure to have the detective be a woman. And then when women first started coming into those kind of roles in movies and television and books, they usually have to be kind of as hard and bitten as the men and everything, but when you make them pregnant, forget it, you can't do that. She's really, you know, she's really a woman. She's, you know, and she can do the job, right? So she's not a masculinized woman. Yeah, in the back.
I just wanted to say the best scene in that movie was at the end when she says to her husband, you know, after all this mayhem and death is going on, she says, honey, you know, we're really doing well.
Yeah, you know, now you've reminded me, your husband's also making a stamp. Isn't he? He's designing a stamp for the United States Stamp Making Federation, whatever that organization's called. Okay. And isn't it of a bird, a weird species of bird or something? You know? There's all this stuff, and not only that, but an old high school sweetheart looks her up and she has a really awkward lunch with him. Okay, what does that have to do with the plot? What does the stamp have to do with the plot? Nothing. What is the, yeah.
But just a question, it has nothing to do with the plot, but, I mean, it seems obviously, isn't it really about the development of that character?
Yeah, so, and how, yeah, exactly. So my point is that we can get hung on one thing. You know, we can get hung on the story we want to tell, but there's all this other stuff that's really essential. You know, you could have told that plot. You could have told it without that tone. I think Hitchcock or somebody certainly did it back in the day. You know, you could have told it without that subplot. You know, you could have told it with the male detective. You could have told it any number of ways. You had more though. What?
Well,
yeah.
It was, you know, when I think about that scene when she rejects the old high school lover,
Yeah.
you know, she's a really tough lady and she's really smart.
Yeah, she
but
is.
she's also not, she's feminine.
Yeah, right. That's what's great.
She's kind. She has feelings. She's not a bad person.
That's right.
She hasn't become hardened by her job.
She hasn't, yeah. I mean, all of this adds to it, you know.
Yeah.
And just the fact of choosing that unusual character leads to all this stuff. It even leads to action, which means plot points, right? The plot's interrupted by her having to eat or having to throw up or having to eat or having to throw up or having to eat or having to throw up, you know. I just want to give one other example, and this is one we've seen a lot. A lot of us probably want to write about our childhoods or our past if we're working on memoir, and that's one of the places that goes so flat, you know, when we try and write about it. And I just want to point to one technique that's used a lot, which is the framing story. And how many people have seen this wonderful film called Cinema Paradiso? A lot of you, okay, good. If you haven't seen it, I recommend it because it's a wonderful film. It's an Italian film. But also, it's a great illustration of this. Obviously, the writer of the film wanted to write about how his love of movies first got ignited, which was he lived in a, I don't know how much is fictional and how much is non-fictional. But anyway, the character in the story learns to love movies because he starts hanging around the one movie house in this tiny village, and he makes a pest of himself to the projectionist, and the projectionist finally starts to teach him how to use the projector, and he gradually grows up to being the projectionist himself, and then gradually becomes a director. Well, what makes the story work is that the story is framed in what you call the current day, which is that it begins with, in my memory, it's I'm not sure what the opening scene is or exactly how that works, but basically there's a frame story, which is the old projectionist has died, and the now successful director, who's actually kind of jaded, goes back to his old town for the funeral of the old projectionist, and that provokes him to remember everything about his childhood and why he loved movies in the first place. And the whole town's changed, and it's clotted with traffic now, and it's a big city, and et cetera, and he thinks it makes him think of his high school sweetheart, who was his only true love. And now he has one affair after another, and his life is kind of empty. And going back reignites him to loving films and understanding what love is. It's an oversimplification, of course. And then most of the film is about him back in the day growing up and going through that whole thing I just described of him learning to love movies by becoming a projectionist. And eventually there's a fire, you know, because the old film would catch on and the projectionist becomes blind. I think maybe that's when he has to take over the projecting himself and all this stuff happens. But it's framed by in the current day, you know, or the current day of the film. So this is something that's really commonly done. But in our minds, when we're thinking about this, often we think, I want to write about my childhood. I don't want to write about life now. Well, you know what? The key might just be writing about your life now. It might be starting with going back to your old town. We've probably all gone back to our old town for some reason, you know, or maybe Albuquerque's our old town here. We just go back to our old neighborhood or something, you know, brings us back. And then you got two things going on at once. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. And more than two things, really. But it's nice to have those two time frames going. This is one of the reasons that there often are multiple time frames, is it gives dimension. When you start looking for this, you'll see it all the time. When you start looking at authors you like, go back and read your favorite books and ask yourself if the person's really staying on one track and telling one story. Almost never. It's really rare. I can't even point to a case where there's just a linear story being told and it's only one thing. You know, it may exist. You know, maybe the book Stoner, which is not about people who get stoned. It's about a guy named Stoner and it pretty much traces his life from beginning to end. And maybe that's a book that succeeds in only having one. But probably if I went back and looked at it, I'd find another dimension to it, you know. But anyway, try it, you know, and see how it works for you. And for a lot of people, it really unlocks something. Try and just take a couple of things that don't seem to have anything to do with each other and smush them together and see what happens. It's playful. Why did we start writing? Like I said, kids love this kind of exercise because it's playful. And most of us started writing because we enjoyed it. And then a lot of us, when we get serious about it, all of a sudden we don't enjoy it. It's kind of a grind. So this is a way to get that the playful mind is a creative mind. The mind that's just driven wants to finish the thing. Very hard to get a convincing, and satisfying creative flow going. So I guess it's time for me to wrap up. So I will. I do want to say that Tanya and myself are teaching this wonderful workshop for the second year in March at Lake Louise in the Canadian Rockies in the Fairmont Hotel. And I have some handouts on that if anybody might be interested in coming for 4 days of writing. I do meditation with it, which if you haven't done meditation before and you think it's just chilling out, if it was just chilling out, I would be bored. I wouldn't be interested. I've done it for 30 years because it's given me the key to my mind and to creativity. So we use it specifically in regards to creativity. And the Fairmont Chateau we don't quite have luxury chateaus in national parks in the United States the way they do in Canada. It's a luxury hotel, very, very comfortable in this incredible setting. It's the most, Lake Louise is considered the most scenic, the most photographed, the most visited point in all of Canada. So it's really stunning. So I have some flyers on that, or you can sign up we have a newsletter that we send out just a few times a year saying what our other workshops are. If anyone's interested, please give me your email list on this piece of paper up here. The Fairmont Chateau thing, one more thing about it is that the price on it is in Canadian dollars, which means it's only about 3/4 of what the price looks like. And it's all inclusive for everything, all meals, all accommodations, the teaching, even gratuities. You don't have to do anything. You just show up and everything's taken care of. And if you sign up by January 28th, you get a deluxe Lakeview room upgrade. So, thus they just told us. So we had such a great time there last year. It's such an amazing setting to write in an inspiring natural setting like that. So, thank you all for your attention. It's been a pleasure talking to you.